Hello and welcome to the Geographic Calculator webinar on what's new in Geographic Calculator 2016. I'm Taya Youngs, an applications specialist with Blue Marble Geographics, and I'm here with Sam Knight, the Director of Product Management.
Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to this live session on Geographic Calculator. Today's session is an exciting one for us here at Blue Marble. We're going to be going over the new features in Geographic Calculator 2016, the brand new release for 2016. We are recording today's session, and this will be posted on our site as soon as the recording is prepped and ready to go up on our YouTube page. Today, some of the new features that we're going to be taking a look at include a new start page interface that we've added to the Geographic Calculator. It's going to be a useful launch pad to get into the new job types that we're adding, as well as getting into the familiar job types that we've already been working with. Part of that is a new data loading guide, and that data loading guide is built right into the start page interface, and that's intent is to streamline the way we get to data and get the data to the jobs that we're trying to work with. Some of those jobs that we're going to be taking a look at are new streamlined point database jobs. That's one of our biggest features here, is a new set of point database jobs that are purpose-built for the individual types of data processing that we do in those locations. And there's a number of other things we're going to be taking a look at. Those are just sort of the highlights of where we're going to be going today.
You can subscribe to these videos from our webinars page at bluemarblegeo.com or from our YouTube channel page. Additionally, you can find out about training opportunities on our training site. Both web addresses are shown on screen there and are linked from our main homepage.
Okay, and we have one set of events in particular that we'd like to draw your attention to. In past years, we've done single user conferences. We've picked a location somewhere around somewhere in the US, or we've done some in Canada as well. This year, we're doing more events like our user conference. We're calling it the User Conference Roadshow. We're going to actually be doing this in 5 locations to start with throughout the US and Canada. So we're going to be coming to Houston, Pittsburgh, Calgary, Boston, and San Francisco. We're going to be featuring user presentations there, as we always do. We're going to be highlighting some of our latest technology and talking about where we're going with all of the Geographic Calculator and Global Mapper product lines that we have. So check out the web address on screen there. That's bluemarblegeo.com/BMUC. Check out those dates, and the call for presentations is open there, so please feel free if you have an interesting workflow that you do with any of our products, please feel free to submit a presentation. We'd love to have you.
If you have questions during the session, please use the questions panel to the right of your screen in the GoToWebinar tools. We'll answer some as we go and have some time for more at the end, so we'll be keeping an eye out for those while we do our presentation today.
Okay, and after the session, as always, if you think of a question a little bit late, feel free to use our tech support as a sounding board for that question. And you can reach our tech support group at geohelp@bluemarblegeo.com, the address right at the bottom of the screen there. So let's get down to it.
Right. So to start, let's take a look at the most obvious change, the new start page interface.
Okay, so the start page is going to be this panel on the screen here that we're taking a look at. It's actually the majority of my screen right now. When you start the Geographic Calculator up, start version 2016 up, either 32 or 64-bit, this start page is a new jumping off point. You'll see over on the left-hand side, our project manager is still there, and you'll see a lot of the familiar jobs and pre-saved settings that I use in a lot of our sessions. The panel in the middle here is the start page, and this chunk right here with the small section that kind of looks like the project manager with the faded out icons, and the section in here labeled Job Guide. This is an interactive area that gives us information about any of the individual jobs. And as I click in here, I'll click into the list of the available job types. This is where you can go to get information about all of the individual jobs that we have throughout the Geographic Calculator. We know a lot of our beginner users see a lot of interface there. They may not know where to start. All of these descriptions are sort of a quick launch jump off point. They tell you about what they do, they tell you about the supported data types, and then down at the bottom of the screen it will tell you about what types of data can be created from each of those calculation pages, whether it's a conversion or a forward and inverse calculation or something with vector or raster data, any of those functions that are available. So we're calling this part of the start page the job guide, and there's a couple other panels on here as well. So I'm going to click back up to my main job guide listing, and we'll see the panel at the very bottom. This one changes as we select any of those individual types, but in the absence of a selected job type, what that's going to display is a list of rotating tips. So whenever you start the application or you come back to the job guide, you'll see a little quick tip down there to help you get the most out of the application. Some of those are just general information, some of those are tips on particular jobs. You'll also see those tips as we pick certain job types where we had some extra available space, such as the interactive job. So you'll see some topical-based tips in there to help steer you into some of the finer tuning settings. As well, over on the right-hand panel there, we're calling this area of the interface the news box, and this is actually also a dynamic panel. So users that are offline will see some different content in there rotate through. Users that are web connected will see this periodically refresh. The kinds of things we're going to be putting out there are pointers to various resources on our website. Right now we've got a link going to our YouTube channel. We'll probably be updating these with links to things like web sessions as we have them, Blue Marble user events such as our user conference series that will be traveling around, various conferences and expos that we'll be finding Blue Marble staff at throughout the years. So that'll be a dynamic news page. Again, you'll see that refresh if you are web connected each time you start the application. So that's the sort of the main layout of the start page itself.
But the start page does more than just telling you about the jobs. Let's take a look at the data loading guide as well.
Okay, so the data loading guide is this little section at the very top of the start page. So you'll see I've got a couple little icons up there and I've got a file field in there. The job guide is not just a reference point. So if you're still looking at all of these types of possible jobs that you have, and you have a piece of data, maybe you're a brand new user, or you're somebody that doesn't use the application very often, if you're not sure exactly where you need to go in all of these available calculations and job types that we have, you can start by simply adding some data in there. So one of these icons will help us open a file. The other one will help us open a database based form. So whether that's a spatial database or something like an ODBC database. I'm going to load just a simple file in here, and I'm going to grab an Excel sheet. This is one of the most common things folks do with our application here. So I'm just going to give it an Excel sheet. And what you're going to see happen is the list of available job types is going to narrow down based on the data that you're feeding it. And that will take place whether you load in any of the database types, whether you load in vector data, raster data. You'll see only those jobs that correspond to the particular type of data that you're trying to bring in. So if you're loading in something like an Excel sheet like we have, you'll see all of the various point database functions and things like the land survey summary for Canadian survey sheets and area calculation tools as well. So you'll only see the list of those particular conversion pages that actually support the data you're working with. As well, you'll see all of the other input types that can go into that job. You'll see all of the output types that are supported by the particular job. If we click on any of those particular functions, you'll see some information about what exactly that job does to help you get to the right place in the interface. So let's say, for example, I wanted to end up with a point database conversion. I can see, okay, this is going to allow me to take my Excel sheet and convert that over to a D-based format or a vector-based format, and that's the workflow I'm looking for. I don't actually have to click over into my project manager. I can just simply click that Create Job button that's going to be right at the bottom of each of those job guide pages. As well, if you're loading a piece of data that carries its coordinate system information with it, such as a vector file or a raster file that might have an additional reference file with it, you'll see that coordinate system information in the pane on the right. You can also set that at this point. If you already know the coordinate system that you're going to be using for input, you can set it right there and then hit Create Job, and what that will do is take you out to one of the regular jobs. It's going to create a new job to host that data in there.
Our experienced users might also be noticing some subtler changes to the interface, like icons and menus.
That's right. So in addition to just the start page, as we start casting a little bit wider net throughout the application, we'll see that there's been a bit of a refresh just about everywhere throughout the interface. Even on the toolbar buttons that we've had for a long time, folks that are particularly paying attention will notice that they've actually changed as well. We've started laying the groundwork for some larger interface changes to help bring the calculator into sort of a more modern era of hardware and monitor resolution settings and things like that. So we've done a lot of work to the simple graphical interface that you work with. It's part of the application we don't always necessarily think about, but the nuts and bolts of just simply how we get around have all had a slight refresh here as well. All of the job types themselves, we've added a number of new types of jobs at this release. So all of the jobs now have their own icons. As we click into each of those types, you'll see a large version of what that is, and then the smaller versions in the job guide and as well in the project manager. There are also some pieces here that a lot of folks that we've tried this out on haven't actually even noticed some of the changes that we've made, particularly up around the menus and how those menus work. We've done some shuffling around up in there. So if you, for example, go to look for the georeferencer tool and it's not where you think it should be, it's now under a new menu called Tools, along with the linear unit converter. Some of our menus, in doing some analysis on exactly where people click intuitively to look for certain things, we found we needed to do a little bit of realignment, a little bit of reorganization in there, and so we've done some work rearranging a lot of these menus. Toolbars now have their own menu. The view menu now controls only things that are sub-panels, such as the project manager, the viewer tools, all of those windowed components that we have throughout the application, toggling the visibility of those functions. The tools menu now has things that are just additional tools. These are typically going to be pop-up tools such as the georeferencer or the linear unit converter, and we're leaving some room there to add on future tools that we still have on our development list for the future. So all the menus, all of the icons, there's been a refresh just about everywhere throughout the application that you're going to interact with in a visual mode.
But the jobs themselves have also changed a bit in this release.
Right, so that's sort of the last piece, and that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time here. So if we take a look at an interactive conversion, this is sort of our ultimate plain vanilla job. This is one of the jobs that just about everybody that uses the Geographic Calculator is familiar with. You'll notice some subtle changes on here. And so another part of the analysis that we did throughout the Geographic Calculator was just simple workflow and mouse click analysis, seeing exactly where we needed to move from the top to the bottom of our page to set up whatever type of calculation or conversion that we're going to be working on. So we spent a lot of time mapping out exactly where your mouse goes, and we made some subtle changes and some larger changes, and we'll be taking a look at some of those changes as we step through the various jobs here. So on the interactive conversions, one of the first things you might notice is this new panel at the very top. Now these controls were things that used to be at the very bottom, and so just to walk you through some of the process that we looked at here for making these changes is when we started off on a job, the very first thing we had to do was go to the bottom of the interface. We'd say what type of operations we were going to complete on that job and what direction we were going to convert. And then we had to go back to the top of the interface. And these are typical things that we've worked with for a long time. The interface has been as it was for a very long time. But just because we're used to it doesn't necessarily mean it was the best way to keep going. So these are the types of factors that we took in. Most of the jobs, interactive here, all the point database jobs we'll be taking a look at, the vector and raster jobs as well. All of these jobs had this type of analysis performed on them, and we've realigned a number of the functions. We were able to gain a lot of space through simple alignment and streamlining and tweaking of the interface. And where we've ended up is all of our jobs are now much more top to bottom, left to right workflows, less clicking back and forth in different directions all across the interface to set up a simple conversion. We'll see this throughout each of the various types that we're looking at. You'll also notice that a lot of the portions of the application have actually gotten a little bit more compact. They mostly look the same as they did. They have all the same information. We haven't done much in terms of changing font sizes, but through some very subtle streamlining, simple things like our coordinate system panels have gotten smaller. And where we'll see that getting more useful is on some of the larger interfaces. Interactive is a fairly small job in itself. Doesn't take up the whole screen to complete one of these. But as we step into the various point database jobs, we'll see some of those larger changes that we have. So let's step on over to a point database conversion. Now on the point database job, you're going to notice right away a few visual changes. The first thing that we notice right off the bat, a lot of our test users noticed, is the grid control looks different in the middle, the place where we actually display the data. The largest thing we have in there is you'll see some gradients on some of the things like the column bars, and you see the every other row shading, such as a simple checkbook register might contain. We did replace this control. This is a largely under the hood thing that we'll notice. The most visual change here is simply the coloration that we have on the every other row shading. Under the hood, some of the changes that have taken place in there is it's gotten a lot more efficient in terms of memory usage. A lot of folks that are commonly working with big data are familiar with our setting here to only load the first X number of records in a data grid, what we call partial load mode. And folks that are particularly familiar with that mode will notice that we've brought it out to the main screen. So we've actually stuck that right out on the main input. When we go to add a job for input, I'm just going to go ahead and click on that add button there. You'll notice it goes right to a file add dialog. One of the things we got a lot of feedback about over the years was that it was a little bit clunky of a workflow that we had previously on the PDC job, just to be able to add data. We had some redundant clicks in there, and there was some what people thought was intuitively not so intuitive behavior. So we've simplified this load process. You go right to loading your data. It loads your data in the main screen, and we need to think less about this partial loading mode. The partial loading mode has gotten to be much more optional than it used to be. With the replacement of our grid control in the application, we're able to load much larger data files before running into memory issues on just about any machine we've tried it on. You can load very large data sets without needing to partially load. Now we've left this setting in here simply as a tool that folks can take advantage of. Myself, I still toggle on the partial loading mode if I'm working with very large data, just to save the load time. I typically only commonly need to take a quick look at a preview of a file. I don't actually need to visualize millions and millions of records. So I'll very often still toggle that on just as an ease of use thing for myself to save a little bit of load time initially. The other piece that we'll notice about the interface is it's not your imagination if you think you're seeing more rows of data on screen right now. Through some of those space-saving measures, we've saved a little bit of room at the top, we compacted a little bit of room at the bottom, and we're now actually able to get more of the data grid on screen. Even if you're working on a lower resolution laptop, you don't have a whole lot of pixels to fill with data, you will notice that you're able to see more of that point database grid on screen at one time. So we're putting not just more of the grid on screen here, we're also getting rid of the old column settings button. Now, for anybody that's a new user, you may not be aware that we used to have a button that was located right about where my cursor is, and that button was called column settings. That would launch an additional dialog that would bring up a series of drop downs that we use to control the inputs and the outputs of those jobs. We've completely done away with the column settings, and we've brought the column settings for each conversion panel right out onto the main screen. This was another one of our most common sources of error, where folks would click on the column settings button, they'd move into the secondary dialog, set the drop downs for the inputs and output columns, and then close that dialog. And at that point you couldn't actually see what your settings were. So we've brought that out to the main panel here. We'll simply use those drop downs that are going to correspond to the header row of your data grid. Those are visible right on the main screen, and it saves a little bit of time if you make a simple mistake. If you do something like, pick the wrong column in there, it's a lot easier to see this after you get your error message on conversion that something has gone wrong and you don't quite know what. With having those column settings right there on the main screen, it puts it right in front of you, makes it a little bit easier to make sense of all of those settings that you have in one place. This brings just about everything out onto the main screen here. And the last piece of this is, you'll notice we are now including the output data field on the main job, even if we're not in that partial loaded mode. We have the ability to fully load most data sets now without running into any of those memory issues. And so we've streamlined the interface to be able to go directly out to file or to process on screen. The partial loading mode was, we've streamlined that a series of times over the years, and we really feel like we're getting it dialed in now, and it should be fairly easy to use for just about any user. So we can specify what our output data is, and we can go ahead and preview the conversion right on screen. We just click the preview button. We'll see that fill in our converted outputs on screen. Then if we have a data file specified for output, we can say process, write that straight out to file during its conversion without going through the whole save as process that we used to have. So there's some larger changes, some smaller changes on the interface. A lot of it is very subtle. We hope that you won't actually notice a bunch of the changes that we've made. Where we've found ourselves with our own work here is that the application on the point database conversion job in particular is it's a lot simpler to use, it's a lot more intuitive for a new user, and the job guide helps us get back to those places where we have additional questions. We're not exactly sure where we need to end up in the application.
The process of setting up multiple conversions on a PDC job has also gotten an important update.
Yes, now this is something that's also been a very long time coming. Now for this, I've got another piece of data loaded, and I'm going to click over to a different PDC job that has a different set of data going on in here. So I have one single set of coordinates coming in, and you'll see I have two sets of output columns defined where my output is going to go. Now, we've had the ability to do multiple conversions for a number of years on the PDC job, but the trick with that job is that previously all of those conversions had to be within the same coordinate system. So all of your input system had to be the same as all of your output system. That was useful for a few particular types of data, but what a lot of folks asked for a lot, this is a request that we've been hoping to be able to implement for a long time, and we've finally, through the rebuild of the interface, we're able to accommodate this. Our multiple conversions can now go between different coordinate systems. So the example I have right here is I have some source latitudes and longitudes, and I'm going to convert these both to a UTM projection as well as a state plane projection available for output. Now this box here, the multiple conversion box, this used to be found on that column settings interface that we've done away with. So we brought that out from the column interface to the main conversion. And in that drop-down, you'll see I have conversion 1 and conversion 2. We could add any number of additional conversions in there. Those will be added simply by clicking the little plus button next to those. You can also delete those that we've already added if you want to back one of those off. By default, it's going to start with just 1 in there. That's going to be a normal conversion for us, and we can then add in, again, however many we like. And you'll see on my conversion 1, I have a group of settings here going from WGS84 lat long to WGS84 UTM zone 19. And I'm reading from my input column lat and long to my output column UTM 19 northing and UTM 19 easting. Now if I use my multiple conversion drop down to hit 2, you'll see I have an entirely different group of settings here. Now I'm going from WGS84 latitude longitude, and I'm performing a transformation over to a system on a different datum. So entirely different coordinate systems for input and output. These are they can be wholly independent of each other. I could have multiple sets of input columns over here. This is just a quick illustration of a fairly common surveying exercise. A lot of surveyors we work with like to have multiple coordinate systems all based on one single start. And the process for output here, I'm just going to go ahead and hit preview, and we'll see all 4 columns fill in with those different coordinate system information for output. And again, we're not limited by a number of output columns here. We can actually go ahead and perform, a whole series of these. We can have 8 different sets of columns if we want to, or more. However many coordinate systems you've got that overlap in a given area, you can actually drop those all right in one sequence there. So that's we expect that to be popular with anybody working with a lot of control data. We expect that to be popular with surveyors, folks in the seismic industries as well. I'm sure that's gonna see a lot of action, because that's been a long time coming, and we're really pretty excited about that particular feature. So now we've talked a bit about the point database conversions job, and I'm gonna shift it up and talk about the other point database conversions jobs that we've added in here. So we've actually split what used to be a single job into a whole series of jobs. So we now have 5 different kinds of point database based interfaces. So we started out with a point database conversion. Pretty simple stuff. We have an input sheet. We have 2 input coordinate columns on one coordinate system. We have 2 output coordinate columns on one output system. And again, we could do the multiple conversions there if we wanted to. But that's just conversion. So the point database conversions job historically it's actually done 6 different things, and it had 2 different modes of doing those. So it was actually one interface that did about 12 different things, and it, under the hood, for us, code-wise, was a little bit of a nightmare for some of our developers to get into. There was a lot of special case logic in there, and there were a lot of settings on top of settings that were a little intimidating for new users. So what we've done is we've actually now broken those out into 5 distinct types of jobs. And you'll see those in your default workspace when you fire up Calculator 2016 for the first time. We've added a point database forward and inverse job, and this is one of the jobs that still does a couple of things because the interface is so similar and the math is so similar between those 2. We have a forward or inverse drop-down to choose what type of function we're going to complete. And so this is now a purpose-built job to either calculate distance and azimuth between 2 points, so that's the inverse portion of that, or calculates the end point of a traverse when you supply a starting coordinate, in this case a longitude and latitude, and a distance and azimuth away from that. That's a forward calculation. You'll notice the column settings are a little bit distinct on that. We need for input a input coordinate as well as a method of navigation, a distance and an azimuth away from that. So it requires different input settings for the conversions, and it is going to calculate, in this case, a latitude and longitude for output, or in the case of an inverse function, it would be calculating a distance and azimuth set of columns for output. So unique settings to that particular type of calculation, separated from the normal conversions job. So the conversions job has gotten simpler by removing this chunk of logic and interface, moving it to its own job, and this job has also gotten simpler to set up since you don't have to navigate through the other settings that are not intended for this particular place. We've done that same type of separation on all the point database functions. So conversion, forward inverse, the scale and translate job. This is essentially a Cartesian operation for stretching, multiplying, rotating, and skewing numeric data. We have the point database best fit job, has gotten its own unique interface now as well. Easier to set up than ever. It still is a rather advanced function, but it's got much simpler to create those polynomial transformation-based coordinate systems. Still requires the same types of control data, some local coordinate system coordinates for input, and some tie coordinates for those in any projected or geodetic system to locate those spatially for us. Still has all the same settings found. It's just a little bit more streamlined, one-stop interface to put everything all on the main screen and take care of those best fit-based calculations. And likewise with the derived datum shift interface. All of those settings exposed right on the main screen. It's now easier than ever to derive a 3-parameter or a 7-parameter transformation. So the separation of the point database job is really one of the biggest new groups of settings that we've introduced with 2016. So hopefully those jobs will be easier than ever to do, and new users will have an easier time coming up to speed. Users that have been with us for a long time should also be able to come right along. We've put a lot of work into this, and we really hope you like the new portions of the interface.
So what have we added for the administrators?
Okay, so I mentioned that we've added a little bit of something for everybody in this release, and particularly one of our administrative requests for years has come about where we install the application to. Unfortunately, there's actually nothing I can show you for this because the new function on this one comes during installation. Previously, under the administrative settings, I'll just point this out where this used to live, under the administrative settings, we used to have on our general tab, we used to have a setting on here to store the profile by the user, and you'll see that setting is still there. With this setting is actually now controlled by the installer. So when you go to install the application on a new machine, there is an option to install directly to a user-based profile or to install it for everyone on that machine. And that takes care of your storing the profile by a user account setting under the admin control panel. The old workflow required you to install the application and then set it under the administrative options. This is going to be done now at the time of install. That should simplify the process for anybody working in a restricted environment where your user account, and I'm referring to your Windows user account, which you log on to your own machine with, where your Windows user account is restricted to only let you have access to your specific folders. For a long time, the calculator has intended to be a shared application, so any user on the same machine has access to the same settings. But now with this new setting, that process for setting up a user-specific install folder should be easier than ever to set. We expect anyone at a particularly large company where you have software maintained by IT groups, we expect that to be popular with your IT folks, with your administrators themselves, the folks that are doing the geodetic administration of the application, and particularly any of our military users as well should have a little bit easier time getting that installed as well.
Let's also make sure to talk about some of the geodetic updates.
Okay, so as with every release, we've added a whole series of new geodetic objects available throughout the interface. And these are going to be everything from transformations to different ways of going about the transformations, new projections, new types, various things like that. First of all, we've moved our database up to EPSG version 8.8. That was the latest fall release from the EPSG database. For anybody that's not familiar with the EPSG database, you can look that up at epsg-registry.org. That is a repository of standardized coordinate systems, transformations, all sorts of geodetic methods. The contents of the data source itself largely are based on the contents of the EPSG. It is the sort of de facto world standard for bringing in new coordinate systems and transformations and sharing those definitions between users. One of the new items that we've added in is a new projection type. This is a cartographic projection type. It's called Natural Earth 2. I'll just point that out. Found right in our list of projection methods. So the initial one was Natural Earth. We added that a couple years ago. We've added Natural Earth 2. That's a worldwide cartographic use projection that some folks have been asking for. There are also some new vertical transformation settings here, and these are going to be specific to vertical transformations that are based on gridded geoid models. So I'm going to go down under our transformation definitions and get down under our single vertical transformations. And just so we have something to look at, I'm going to open up a common geoid, EGM 96, vertical transformation. I'm going to open up its parameters. And this is a good place to illustrate. We see now on the screen here, the parameter screen, where we mention what file we're using, what grid file is going to define that geoid transformation for us. We now have an interpolation method that is listed for it. All of the geoid types that we use from around the world, they all come with a default interpolation type. Some geodesists, some academics like to experiment with different interpolation types. And the type here that we're looking at is simply equidistant spline. There are all sorts of methods from bilinear to a bicubic interpolation. These are available now as a per transformation setting. You're no longer forced to use the default if you are working with a custom definition, and particularly for folks that are working with custom vertical geoids. If you are using the combination of our application global mapper in tandem with the Geographic Calculator to make custom geoid models, you can now choose the interpolation method to apply for those vertical transformations. As well, there is another new setting that we've added, a new set of methods for those of you that are working with time-based transformations. And so we'll take a look under the transformations menu one more time in our datum-based transformations. When setting up a new transformation, there are now two types of 14-parameter time-based transformations, and those correspond with the two rotation conventions. Previously, we had a singular 14-parameter time-based method. We've added the second one, so now we support native entry of coordinate frame rotation based 14 parameters, and as well the position vector rotation. So no more changing the signs on your rotations for those temporally based transformations in there.
We also have an interesting new magnetic declination model.
Yes, this is a particularly interesting model that we've added in. You can find the magnetic declination models under the preferences menus in the calculator. There is a simple option to toggle on the display of magnetic declination, and when installed, this is an extra download from our website. When installed in this list, and I'm realizing I actually don't have it installed on my laptop right now. When installed, you'll see a new model in there called GUFM1. The GUFM1 model is actually a historical model. So a lot of folks are familiar with any of the modern sort of temporally based transformations or magnetic declination models. We're typically talking about recent history on those. And by recent history, I mean anything sort of from the 1900s on to the present day. The GUFM1 model is actually a historical model based on nautical references that go back 500 years. And so, 400 years. And so the date ranges covered by this magnetic declination model go from the year 1590 up to 1990. And so these are going to be magnetic declinations. It's a large grid model based on very, very early mariner observations, all stitched together across time into a historical model for calculating where magnetic declination was. Very useful for working with historical nautical charts and things such as that, where measurements were based on these very old magnetic readings as the compass sort of came into modern use in navigation. So there's a number of new pieces here that we've added throughout the application. And at this point, I think we'll click it over and take some questions.
All right, we've had a few questions come in. Does the 2016 version require a new license?
Yes. So our last release you might be familiar with if you're a current user was 2015 Service Pack 1. The way our licenses work is the license is good for that major version. So users of 2015 get Service Pack 1 for that available. Users that are going to step up to 2016, that does require a new license file. And all you need to do for that, if you have current maintenance, is write into our licensing team or our tech support team at authorize@bluemarblegeo.com, or also you could write into geohelp@bluemarblegeo.com. Okay, sorry, we're just trying to make sense of some of the questions that have been coming in.
We have a question about whether the Geographic Calculator can be used in different platforms. For example, can it work on Linux or for a Mac?
So that's a tricky one. Our main development is for Windows. We're typically a Windows only shop. We do know of some users that are using it in the context of emulators on those environments. Unfortunately, due to a number of factors, we can't officially support the use of emulators, but we do know of some folks that are using emulators to accommodate Linux or Macs.
We have a question about when this is going to be posted online. Somebody missed the beginning and was wondering when the recording is going to be posted online.
Okay, well, what happens when we do these recordings is basically right afterwards I take the recording. I need to do a little bit of cleanup. We have to stitch together an audio recording and the recording of the video itself. That usually takes a couple of hours to do the processing on it, so we should be able to get that up online by tomorrow. If I'm really, really lucky, it'll be by the end of the day, but I'm not usually able to finish the processing by then. So we should hopefully see this up tomorrow. If you are a subscriber on our YouTube channel, you'll get an instant notification of that, and you can get to our YouTube channel and see our posted videos as soon as they're available right on our webinars page where you came to sign up for this webinar as well.
We also have a question about the seismic module.
Oh, okay, so the seismic survey conversion job, we didn't really talk about that job because we haven't actually done a whole lot of changes to this interface quite yet. We are going to be working on a number of enhancements to the seismic survey conversion, but for the new users that are attending, the seismic survey conversion job is essentially a streamlined point database style interface for some very common seismic types. The example I have on screen is a SegP1 file. The other types this job supports are the UCOA P190 formats as well. The modern OGP P111 format, we have support for that in here as well for conversion. And also an older format called SPS, the Shell Process System format. That is just another one of those older seismic types, sort of similar to SegP1s. This is a streamlined interface we introduced a few years ago, and what this does for us is it allows easy conversion based on your coordinate system settings for input and output. Because the seismic data types are so rigidly defined for where the columns are located, all you have to do is specify what your input and output coordinate system is, and we will automatically read and write back to the appropriate columns, whether it be a geodetic column or if it is going to be a projected column. There are also some tools specific to the seismic data types for cleanup of data that don't cleanly align to the specification for that seismic type. There's a wizard that allows us to bring those in and correct problems with things like the headers or the column structure in there. We do actually have a whole webinar session dedicated to the seismic job. The seismic survey conversions job. You can find that right on our webinars archive page and on our YouTube channel as well. That'll go into probably much greater detail than I can get into in just a few minutes here. We will also be refreshing that webinar this year as we are actually presently working on some enhancements to the seismic survey job that we'll be rolling out with the service pack later this year.
When will SP1 be released?
Okay, so that's an excellent follow-up question to the first one. Service Pack 1 we will be releasing. Right now we are sort of tentatively targeting this early summer, late spring, that kind of a range. I don't want to nail that down too far, but we are actively developing for Service Pack 1, and so we should see that early summer. Again, is typically when we see that kind of a release.
Are all these features found in both the 32 and 64-bit version of Geographic Calculator?
Yes, so it was a few years ago that we launched our 64-bit version. Since then, the 64-bit version has sort of become the default that most folks are working with on modern computer systems. But all of the features that we've looked at today, all of those changes are found both in the 32-bit and 64-bit versions.
Are workspaces forward compatible with the new version?
Yes, that's a very, very common question. If you have saved workspaces in any of the previous versions, most commonly folks are going to be rolling up from 2015 or 2015 Service Pack 1. Those are all natively supported by 2016. What happens when you load an older workspace in is because of changes that we've had to because of the change that we've had to make to accommodate the new job types, various things like new coordinate systems that are available and stuff like that throughout the interface. Once you bring an old workspace in and if you save it back to itself, it will be updated and it will no longer be backwards compatible with that older version. So if you are going to be rolling forward from an older installation to the workspace, you may want to make sure you have a backup copy in case you also need to work with data back and forth with folks that are on older installations.
Is Calculator still compatible with GeoCalc mode in Global Mapper?
Okay, and so now I mentioned for folks that are working with Global Mapper to create custom geoids and things like that. right now, the release version of Calculator 2016 is not directly compatible with Global Mapper. Global Mapper will be catching up very, very shortly as we release the next minor version update to Global Mapper itself. That's going to be version 17.1 of Global Mapper. We anticipate that to be released in the next couple of weeks. And as soon as version 17.1 is released, Calculator 2016 will again be directly compatible with that. If you are a user that depends on direct compatibility between Calculator and Global Mapper, you probably just want to wait another week or two before you move up to the Calculator 2016 if you need to be sure that it is going to directly work with Global Mapper.
Is 2016 more stable than 2015 SP1 has been?
Okay, that's a kind of a loaded question. I imagine if you're asking a question like that, you may have had some issues. We have done a lot of work to Geographic Calculator. There have been some very heavy changes throughout the interface. It is performing very stably. If you have had particular problems with any of the previous releases, definitely contact our tech support team. But we do anticipate that this release of 2016 is quite stable, and there are so far, knock on wood, there are not very many known issues with moving up to 2016. It's been a pretty solid release for us. We are mostly actually working on enhancements for the service pack, doing a little more just sort of general cleanup throughout the interface, some more of those modifications to bring the interface of the application forward into modern standards. And I think is that wrapping it up for our questions, Taya?
I think that's about it.
Okay. Well, then I think we're going to wrap that up for today. We'll just say thank you to everybody for attending the session today. It's been a lot of fun talking about all the new features. Thank you, Taya, for joining me.
And thank you, Sam, for presenting all these new features.
And tune in for our next sessions. You can see all of those upcoming topics at our website, and we'll see you next time.